is kill this zoom and just zoom over here. Still hard to get it in. Maybe harder. Let's see if I take the zoom down just a hair. Is that better? I don't know. I'm not sure this represents a two subsystem. If you were doing like an ATM, say the checkout at the stores with self-checkout, the ATM system would be a separate subsystem, right? It would be a totally separate system. And you might include it in your diagram and put it in a box because it's literally a different subsystem than the actual kiosk is. This I'm not sure actually qualifies as a separate system, but I just wanted to show you how you could use the box. Is this making sense? I see one hand up, but yeah. As I said, this is a really, it looks a little dumb, it looks a little easy, but actually when you start thinking about what are the requirements per user, it can get fairly complex. These examples aren't super complex, but one of the things, couple of things I would say about these pictures. You don't want to necessarily take all the actors and try to get the entire set of requirements into one diagram. The reason you don't want to do that is that the whole benefit of these diagrams is that they communicate fairly quickly what the requirements are. If you do that, if you have a thing that's, takes like a banner chart on the walls and is huge, you've lost a lot of your communication advantage because it's too complicated. It becomes really hard to see what's going on. Whereas if you create little smaller use cases, you can actually see what's going on fairly clearly. And it's better to have several simpler charts than it is to have one massively complicated one. Does that make sense? And again, these are really great for communicating. When I'm doing them for myself, I just draw them on paper. And they're kind of sloppy, but it gives me just a quick way of thinking about how, these things are interacting, who's using it, how the interactions work. I am going to do this in here, I think. I'm going to take one use case. I'll take register here. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how you would write these up. And in some companies, when they do these, they'll make the diagrams, but they also write up each use case. And the pattern for doing that can vary a lot. So I'm going to just I'm just making a box with the text tool. I'm going to put it to the top and the left aligned. I want it left aligned. Okay. So, and let's make the font. I don't know what the font is. Is that big enough for the back? You need it bigger? Let's do it a little bigger. You also don't have to do this. Oops, did that go away? You don't have to do these in the Visio. This could be written up in Google Docs or Word or something like that. So I'm going to say what the use case is. And the use case is going to, in this case, be register. And then let's see if I can do this off the top of my head, because as I said, there are different ways to do this. So I am going to say what the I'm going to give it a trigger. Anybody have an idea what the trigger would be? The trigger is what causes this to happen, right? And they could just be like new user wants to register. Sometimes the trigger is something more precise, like some event has to occur before they can, this can happen. For instance, and one of the things you can do too is if there's any prereqs, like before you can log in, you have to register, right? But I'll just do for the prerequisite prereq. I'll just do prereq. I would say none at this point. And then what do we? So then it's sort of the steps, and I'm going to just do one. Let's see. There's also a lot of times I'm going to add one more thing here. Initial state, not state. And again, this could be something you need or don't need. We'll just say the initial state connected and on the website, basically. But again, it could be that, like the database has to be open. So these don't always have to involve people. The database has to be open. The server has to be accepting. There could be different states for the initial. And then for the steps, basically they click the register link. What else would they do? Fill in, and you don't need to be too precise, but I'm going to say user name, password. What else would they do?
Confirm password.
Probably email. Yeah, I mean the username and password is there. And these could be a little more precise depending on what you're doing again. And then after the steps, there can be a final state or end state. And say ready to log in. Again, this is really simple, but the idea is that you can go through these use cases and provide a little bit of depth in terms of the requirements, what's going on, beyond just the little bubble. I'm just going to bold these so they look a little better. Does that make sense? If you ever do this for a company, they will probably have their own version of this with more or less detail. So you could do this. I wouldn't do it in Visio, actually, most of the time. I just didn't want to switch out. You could do this for every one of those, but I wouldn't necessarily. Even when I do, I only do it for the ones that are significant, that are complicated. But it gives you some of the logic that's going on underneath. Questions on that? You guys are mostly quiet, so is it just that time of day and first week? I will post this too, by the way. I'll put it up in the blog. It'll be a picture because it's Visio. I'll save it as a GIF or yeah.
So what's the end result of this? Do you give it to a team or?
So this is part of a team. This is part of the process where you're trying to figure out the requirements for a project you're about to work on. So typically, as a team would work on what are the requirements, you figure out what the actors are, you figure out what the use cases are for each actor. Typically, you would take that to whoever's paying you to do this, and you would confirm that you haven't forgotten any major requirement. So one of the important parts of this is a review, where you go over and say, have we forgotten anything big? And again, it's high-level requirements. So you're not getting down to what server you're going to use or what software or what programming language. You're just, what is it that it has to do to be successful for these different users? And once you've got that figured out and you've reviewed it with the people that matter, with the stakeholders, the actors, right? So you'd ideally ask a fan, ask one of the venues that's going to work with it. We didn't do the artist, but what is it that this has to do for you? And once you've got this all done, you have a template for what the application has to do. You don't have a way for how you're going to do it, but you do have what it has to do. Does that make sense? And it's useful. It is useful. Although, in that book that I suggested, one of the things it talks about is that some companies actually spend months doing use cases. And it was his suggestion, it would be mine too, that's stupid. You want to do this, you want to be relatively thorough, but there's a point where you keep refining it forever. And it doesn't do you that much good after a certain point. You really want to move on. And you can always come back and modify these if you need to. But it serves as documentation too. And as I said, when you get to the test stage, which if you're doing it in kind of an agile environment, you're testing all along, you can go through and you can say, have you done these things? You also need to figure out in agile or in here, which of these are core? Which of these are proof of concept? Which of these do you have to do in order for this application to finally work, right? So without the venues, you probably won't have anything like. I mean, it might be simple that you need to get the shows in there. I mean, this might be the part you work on first because without it, there's nothing for the fan to do. That kind of thing. All right. But the idea is fairly clear, right? What time is it? I was thinking of having you guys work on a few things in a small group, but I don't have them really written out yet. Where you go through and just do a couple of these, and then maybe we whiteboard them. Just at least a couple of them. Why don't we do that just to give you a quick practice, and then we will. I'm trying to think of how I want to do this. I was going to make the index cards of these, so I think I may have to come around to each group and just give you a thing to do. Groups should be maybe 3 people. That makes 10 groups, though.
3.
What? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many are in a row? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 3, actually 4. 4, 8. You gotta go. Okay. Why don't we do 4 and 4, and 3 and 3. And I don't know, do you want 3 and 4 or 4 and 3? Whichever way you want to go. This one is 8, so do 4 and 4. So let me come around to each group and I'll give you something to diagram. You can play with it. And then there's no points attached to this. This is just to help you learn that. And then I think we'll whiteboard a couple of them. These are fairly simple. Some are fairly silly. So I have, you guys will do this. So one is like program smart elevator. Have you ever thought about how they decide when to flush?
Sensor.
When I was a kid, I used to make use that some of these whole group of people just watch your cameras and they push a button. And it was like, they were getting like $5 an hour. They were just like,
That's a unique idea.
that was what I thought when I was a little kid.
All right, why don't you guys do the elevator? So you four together, basically like how would the program smart?
Literally, that was like it.
So what's it require?
Watching cameras and they have to push the button. It's like, I switched it.
So
Someone like just carried through.
That puts you in the one. Just lived for that job. Smiling hard, you know, ear to ear, everything.
the other one I have was
Weird.
Right.
like the software.
That was literally
Alright, so I guess we.
Yeah, so just, yeah, I mean, you're not gonna have to like that.
my favorite work is for.
No, don't worry about writing it out, just the diagram.
So we're working as group?
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, let's narrow it down a little bit more. Would it be the
I think it's, maybe just, yeah, maybe you want to turn.
I'm like, what?
Yeah, so which. No, you three. That's what I'm going to do.
I'd say like the established. Or no, that's the wrong word. Building company.
How about a house security?
Yes.
What would you do?
Yeah, I guess it's
It means that in order to do these, they have to log in. That's the venue. The venue would have to log in in order to add, manage the venue. So they can't do any of these things unless
So
they
it
log in.
can be, it can't be a person.
It can be something else. So the venue, whatever person is working for the venue.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be a person,
Oh.
despite the fact that it looks like a little person.
So let's
I may
maybe
run
think
out of
back.
this, so if you guys have ideas.
What
Who uses alarm?
So the one nobody wants is.
The house is alarm. Okay, and
So
we
I
got.
wonder
Security alarm.
I have to like.
What would they ultimately do or have.
You know, the sensors have this images drawn.
Do the same, the assignment as this one, but with that company. Oh, yes. Yeah, okay. So. Yeah, so like.
Because they have to be, there's nothing. Take my phone out. Unless you want to, you're welcome to come up with one. I'm not sure which one.
And then,
Maybe public, or, yeah, public, and like the public will only have like, they have to like, enter a pin, like your doctor's office, like, use this pin.
was one
Yeah. And then there's something like really, nothing like happened.
Another one. Yeah. A friend member. Yeah, another one. It had. Oh, yeah. So can be.
I can step down information.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is.
And again, it's just for friends.
So,
Alright, so do
they
you
have
want more?
username. They do each one that.
Somebody took that. Yep.
Yeah, no. So.
When I look at, this is a disease.
Allow your
So I have.
Yeah.
Pushes the button.
And they also want to know who does it.
Yeah.
Do they have a camera? Yeah. Each person is.
Oh, yeah.
Now, yes, but in all of them. Security. To be yes. Yeah, of course. Well, I'm not really
Alright, so-
no camera. I know that the market has camera.
Bubble to the right of it, like, I think that's like, the first one would be.
So I'll give you guys about a half hour or so, and then we'll do a couple of them up front just for fun. And talk about them.
Maintenance.
Yeah, like a key card.
Somebody
That you have to, that's
What a maintenance service.
yeah, that would be. It's
So, yeah.
Wow, the dryer. Yeah, I think So What would you do?
That's it, okay. Nah, the 2, 3, 1.
Yeah, so I think they would, like, use five.
I don't know. Same thing again.
Yeah, they would. Yeah. Why?
Well, you know, 1 second.
Well, like, maybe like. I think that would fall under like. Because like.
Wow, but they so they don't have a different group, right?
I mean, sometimes it was security.
Yeah,
Get there, even if it's like a certain.
Yeah, more,
It can be anybody, and it might not bubble, or it might be.
A family only 1 person is just
Members is so we can't get anybody.
Put S in there.
Right.
Do you wanna say user?
What I think we need to
You know what we think about.
So the base they should be,
or.
so you can put out.
They only wanted to do like high security. Yeah, like a building that I worked in a skyscraper. And the only, actually property management, and only I did
For use, of course.